After 3 years of being the employee who kept the business alive, my CEO replied to my equity. Ask with a laughing emoji, and you're just a contractor. I just smiled, quit the morning of our IPO, and watched their whole world collapse. All right, Reddit. Grab your popcorn and buckle up. This one gets real messy. Here's the thing about being indispensable. You become invisible at the same time. That was my life for 3 years at a startup that should have been called howtoexploityourdevelopers.com. I'm Damien, 27 male. It started right after I graduated when I answered a Craigslist ad that just said, need coder. 5 developers had already quit, which should have been my first clue. But I was 24 and broke and honestly thought I was hot stuff. The interview was in a garage with 3 Stanford guys who couldn't code their way out of a paper bag, but had really nice haircuts and said things like, disrupting vertical integration with zero irony. Owen was the CEO. Picture a human Instagram filter with a finance degree and daddy's investment money. Vicky was the CFO. This woman who smiled like a shark and had perfected the art of laughing at Owen's jokes exactly 2 seconds after he finished talking. Brett was the CTO, who I later discovered once asked me if Python was related to snakes. They showed me their code, and I nearly laughed in their faces. React mixed with jQuery, variable names like thingy2 and stuff final real final, and comments that said things like, IDK this works though. Their site crashed regularly because someone had created some seriously inefficient database queries that would time out whenever traffic spiked above normal levels. Looking at their codebase was like watching a car accident in slow motion. Total disaster, but you can't look away. The kind of thing you screenshot and send to your developer friends with the caption F in chat. I should have run. Should have told them to hire someone who specialized in digital archaeology and disaster recovery. But I was dumb and thought fixing impossible problems made me special. I fixed the immediate issues in a few hours. Owen hugged me. Vicky started crying. Brett looked at me like I'd performed a miracle. They hired me for $55,000 on the spot. Should have negotiated. Should have asked for equity in writing. Should have done a lot of things. But when 3 Stanford MBAs look at you like you're their savior and throw money at you that seems real, compared to your current balance of negative dollars, you take it. My girlfriend Kristen was excited at first. We'd been together 3 years since sophomore year, and she worked in event planning. She liked telling people her boyfriend worked at a startup because it sounded cooler than what I actually did. Meanwhile, my best friend Zach thought I was nuts. Zach was a welder who owned his own shop. When I told him about the equity promises, he just shook his head and said, sounds like they're promising you a piece of someone else's pizza. But I didn't listen. The first year was decent. They treated me like I'd saved their lives because I had. When I prevented a major crash during their Series A pitch, Owen took everyone to this fancy steakhouse and gave a speech about how I was key to their success. Vicky bought me a keyboard after I recovered some important data. Brett kept calling me brilliant in meetings while taking credit for everything I built. But the cracks started showing. My 40-hour weeks became 60, then 80, then some weeks I'd hit 90-plus hours when launches went sideways. I'd be deploying patches at 3 in the morning while Owen posted stories from Coachella. I'd debug payment systems on holidays while they did yoga retreats in Bali. My diet became whatever was in the 7-Eleven down the street and enough energy drinks to kill a horse. The 7-Eleven guy started recognizing me, started having my usual energy drinks ready, started asking if I was okay with real concern in his eyes. His name was Luis, and he worked nights too, and sometimes we'd talk for a few minutes about nothing important. My apartment became just a place to shower and change clothes. I'd be there maybe 6 hours a day if I was lucky, and 4 of those were supposed to be for sleeping. The other 2 were usually me staring at my laptop in bed, triple-checking deployments or monitoring error logs. Kristen complained about the blue light from my screen keeping her awake, so I started working in the bathroom with the door closed. Then she started complaining I was never around. We'd have plans and my phone would explode because the site went down. She'd want to go out, and I'd be on my laptop fixing code. Our 3rd anniversary dinner got interrupted twice by Owen calling about issues that turned out to be minor. You care more about that stupid job than us, she said, after I had to leave dessert early to fix a server issue. You're a workaholic, and it's pathetic. I told her it was temporary. Once we closed the next funding round, I'd get equity, and it would all be worth it. She rolled her eyes and mumbled something. Zach was more direct. Bro, they're using you. When are you going to wake up? But I kept believing Owen's promises. Series A came and went. No equity. After Series B for sure, my man. Just got to show more growth. Series B closed. Still nothing. Before Series C, no doubt. Legal stuff. You know how it is. I believed them because I'd convinced myself 3 years of 80-hour weeks had to mean something. That loyalty got rewarded, that I was part of something special. Meanwhile, Vicky started treating me like the help. She'd walk past my desk and drop tasks on me without even stopping. Fix the checkout bug. Client demo in an hour. No, please, no thank you, just orders. When I'd suggest improvements, she'd smile and say, just keep the site running, sweetie. That's your job. Brett was worse. He'd present my work in meetings like he'd built it himself. So I optimized the database structure when he didn't even know what a database was. He'd introduce me to investors as our junior developer when I was the only developer. Once overheard him tell someone I have to explain everything to him multiple times. It's exhausting. I was fixing bugs in his presentation while he said it. I started keeping a mental tally of how many times he took credit for my work. Lost count after 30. The worst part wasn't even the lying. It was how natural it came to him. How easily he'd look investors in the eye and describe technical decisions he had zero involvement in making. The nerve was almost impressive, like watching someone claim they painted the Sistine Chapel while Michelangelo is right there still holding the brush. Brett had perfected the art of taking credit while contributing nothing except his ability to wear a suit and nod. Owen was the worst, though. Everything was about his vision, his company, his success. In private Slack channels with Vicky and Brett, he called me the code guy. In meetings, he'd talk about our world-class engineering team, like I was 30 people instead of one tired guy in a room that smelled like stale pizza and broken dreams. Year 3, my relationship was falling apart. Kristen started coming home later, said she was working on a big event. Then she started going out more with her work friends. I was too tired and busy to notice the signs that were probably neon at this point. Zach noticed, though. He'd see her out at places when she said she was home. He'd text me asking questions I was too stupid to understand. Then came the Friday that changed everything. I came home early because the servers were stable for once. Found Kristen on our couch with some guy named Preston. They were making out. She didn't even look embarrassed, just annoyed I'd interrupted. You're never here. You chose that job over me. This is exactly why Preston and I connected. Preston looked uncomfortable and tried to leave, but I told him to stay. You're blaming me because you cheated? I asked, actually curious about the mental gymnastics. You cheated on us first with that stupid company. You're a workaholic who cares more about Owen's approval than your own life. She stood up like she'd been the victim this whole time. Preston actually makes time for me. He shows up. He's successful. And honestly, maybe this is good. You need to figure out your priorities. I looked at Preston, who was trying very hard to disappear. Then I laughed, because the ridiculousness of my life had finally peaked. You're right, I said. I do need to figure out my priorities. So here's what's going to happen. You and your friend here can enjoy the apartment because I'm done. I'll grab my laptop and clothes and you'll never see me again. I hope you two are very happy together. The look on both their faces was worth 3 years of wasted relationship. Preston looked like he wanted the couch to swallow him whole. Kristen probably had this whole scene planned out in her head where I'd fall apart. Sorry to disappoint. They deserved each other, which was probably the worst punishment I could wish on anyone. I grabbed my stuff and walked out. Crashed at Zach's place that night. He just handed me something to drink and helped me move my stuff out the next day while Kristen was at work. You gonna be okay? Zach asked after we got everything moved. Eventually. Right now I'm gonna focus on work and getting that equity they promised. He gave me that look that said I was being an idiot, but he loved me anyway. Whatever you say, man. But when this whole thing explodes, I got a shovel and no questions. Zach had perfect timing. The explosion was already being built, line by line, in code only I understood. They all thought I was disposable. They were dead wrong. The IPO announcement hit on a Tuesday. Owen stood on a chair during the all-hands meeting and talked about disrupting paradigms and changing the world and all the usual founder garbage. The company was valued at $600 million. $600 million. I did the math right there. The 1% they'd been promising for 3 years would be worth $6 million. Even after taxes, that's enough to buy an actual house and never worry about money again. Enough to prove to everyone, including myself, that the 3 years weren't wasted. Everyone clapped. Vicky popped a bottle. Owen was glowing. That afternoon, I slacked Owen privately. Hey, wanted to confirm the equity details before the IPO. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then just a laughing emoji. A freaking laughing emoji. Followed by, bro, you were never actually an employee. You're a 1,999 contractor. No equity for contractors, that's standard. I stared at the message for like 2 minutes. Contractor, 3 years, 80-hour weeks, no benefits, no equity, no overtime, just $55,000 a year that never increased, despite me being their entire technical infrastructure. I slacked back. You've been promising me equity for 3 years. Yeah, man, but verbally, nothing in writing. You should have had a lawyer look at your paperwork. He actually wrote it like this was funny. Like 3 years of my life was a joke. Here's the thing about being betrayed. There's this moment of clarity. Everything makes sense. All the little things click, and you realize you weren't building a company. You were the company, the product, the resource they mined until there was nothing left. Every time Owen said, "We'll figure out equity soon," he meant never. Every time Vicky smiled and called me sweetie, she was reminding me of my place. Every time Brett took credit, he was showing me what he really thought I was worth. And I'd believe them because I wanted to believe. Because admitting you've been played for 3 years means admitting you're not as smart as you thought you were. And Owen thought it was just business. The bonus announcement came the next day. Everyone gathered in the main office while Owen handed out envelopes. Mine had $300 and a Visa gift card for some pizza place. $300 for keeping their entire company alive for 3 years. Owen made another speech about how everyone contributed to this success, while looking directly through me like I was invisible. Vicky raised her glass and said, "To team effort!" Brett copied her toast word for word 3 seconds later. I went back to my desk and just sat there. Looked at the $300 check. Looked at the three of them laughing and celebrating their success, while I'd gotten less than what you'd tip a decent waiter. The math was simple. 3 years. Roughly 7,000 hours of unpaid overtime. $300 bonus. That's 4 cents per hour of exploitation. I'd been worth less to them than the electricity it took to run my computer. But hey, at least there was pizza. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Kristen blaming me for being a workaholic. About how she was probably right that I'd wasted 3 years chasing something that was never real. Then I stopped feeling bad and opened my laptop. Started looking through my code. Every function, every module, every critical system. All of it had my fingerprints. And I realized something important. The system was really fragile. I'd been holding it together with constant maintenance and patches. Without me actively monitoring things, it would start breaking down pretty fast. Systems that required specific maintenance knowledge to keep running. Code that needed regular attention from someone who understood how all the pieces fit together. The kind of technical debt that accumulates when you rush things and never go back to fix them properly. I'd been asking them for years to let me rebuild things correctly. They always said no because it would slow down new features. Now all that rushed code was their problem, not mine. The IPO ceremony was scheduled for Monday. CNBC would be there. TechCrunch had it on their calendar. Owen's parents were flying in from Connecticut. This was supposed to be his crowning achievement. I spent the weekend documenting everything. Every system dependency, every fragile integration, every potential failure point. Sunday night I texted Zach. "Remember that shovel you mentioned? Say when. Soon. This gonna be bad? Depends on your definition of bad." Monday morning, I made coffee and turned on CNBC. There was Owen on the floor of the stock exchange wearing a fancy suit, looking so proud. The interviewer asked about their engineering, and Owen said something about best-in-class technical team and innovative solutions. I was the team, singular. And their solutions were about as innovative as duct tape. 9:30 a.m. Opening bell. Confetti. Owen grinning like he'd won the lottery. Stock opened at $52. I'd already resigned by email that morning. Effective immediately. No notice, no transition plan. Just gone. Around 9:45 a.m., the first issues started. Some API endpoints timing out. A few database queries running slower than usual. Nothing catastrophic yet. Just the kind of problems that happen when there's no one actively monitoring systems. By 10 a.m., more errors were cascading. The checkout flow was throwing intermittent failures. User dashboards were loading slowly. Their monitoring systems were lighting up with warnings, but nobody knew how to interpret them properly. The thing about technical debt is that it doesn't kill you all at once. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every shortcut you took to ship faster. Every patch you slapped on instead of fixing the root cause. Every time you said, "We'll refactor this later," and never did. All of it comes due eventually. And when it does, you better hope the person who understood how all those broken pieces fit together is still around to fix it. I watched the stock price drop on my phone. $52 to $50, then $48, then $46. The CNBC host looked confused. Owen's face went from proud to concerned in real time. His phone was probably blowing up with calls from the board. Their new engineering team, the ones with real degrees from real schools who were supposed to make me redundant, couldn't figure out what was wrong fast enough. The problems weren't obvious. Everything looked fine on the surface, but underneath the whole system was falling apart. Twitter filled with screenshots of errors. Tech journalists were speculating about everything from cyber attacks to fundamental technical problems. The stock kept falling. By market close, they'd lost about $40 million in valuation. Not a complete disaster, but enough to ruin Owen's big day. Enough to make investors nervous. Enough to prove that maybe their world-class engineering wasn't quite what Owen claimed. I turned off the TV and opened my laptop. By that time, both Owen and Vicky were calling nonstop. 17 missed calls and counting. Text messages ranging from, "We need your help," to "What did you do?" to eventually, "You're destroying everything." I didn't respond to any of them. The stock stabilized over the next few days, as their team slowly figured things out. They brought in emergency consultants, worked 24-hour shifts, eventually patched things together well enough to function. But the damage was done. The IPO had been a mess. Investors were unhappy. Questions were being asked about their technical infrastructure. Owen started calling me a disgruntled contractor who abandoned ship during our biggest moment. Said I'd been planning this, that I'd sabotaged them on purpose. I hadn't, though. I'd just stopped fixing problems that weren't my responsibility anymore. Stopped covering for their technical debt. Stopped being the invisible safety net that kept their house of cards standing. I was just the guy who finally walked away. And man, did it feel good to watch it all fall apart without me there to catch it. Now here's the thing. I'd been screenshotting everything for 3 years. Every Slack message, every email, every conversation. Saved in folders organized by date and category. Titled the main folder Insurance, because even then, some part of me knew this might happen. Now it was time to cash in the policy. Zach came over Tuesday night with takeout and something to drink. Didn't ask questions, just sat there while I organized 3 years of evidence into a timeline. Every broken promise from Owen. Every condescending message from Vicky. Every time Brett took credit for my work. "You're really gonna do this?" Zach asked around a mouthful of food. "Already walked away? Then what's all this?" Making sure everyone knows why. The best message was from Owen to Vicky 6 months before the IPO. Just keep him thinking he'll get equity. By IPO, it won't matter anyway. He won't lawyer up. In writing, time-stamped, preserved forever in Slack's servers. Vicky's response, "Honestly surprised how much he'll do for basically nothing. Best hire we ever made." Brett chimed in with, "As long as he doesn't ask for anything in writing, we're good." Community college guys don't usually know better. Zach read them over my shoulder and whistled. These people are idiots. Rich idiots, though. Not for long if you're doing what I think you're doing. I started contacting tech journalists. Most ignored me, but one reporter from TechCrunch named Casey responded in a few hours. Wanted to verify everything, make sure it wasn't fake, needed metadata and proof. We had a long phone call where Casey asked about timestamps, making me explain technical details, wanting corroboration for everything. The skepticism was actually reassuring. Meant this wasn't just going to be some hit piece I could be sued over. Casey had been covering tech for 15 years and had seen every flavor of startup drama. The skepticism wasn't personal, it was professional. "They really talked about keeping you in the dark about equity in company Slack?" Casey asked. "Among other things. And you just stopped working there?" "Resigned. They're claiming I sabotaged something, but I just quit. What happened after that isn't my problem." Casey was quiet for a moment. "How much documentation do you have?" "Enough." Owen and his crew thought I was just the dumb code guy from community college who didn't know any better. Meanwhile, I'd been building a legal paper trail one screenshot at a time. "Send it all. I'll need time to verify and get their response." Owen started calling Wednesday morning. Multiple missed calls. Texts that started professional and devolved into desperate and finally landed on threatening. "We need your help." Then, "You're destroying everything." I didn't respond to any of them. Thursday, the company released a statement calling me a disgruntled contractor who abandoned his responsibilities during a critical period. Said I'd been fairly compensated and rejected reasonable offers. Implied I'd done something improper. My LinkedIn exploded with views. Former coworkers seemed confused. Recruiters went quiet. One startup that had been interested said they were going in a different direction. Owen had successfully made me look like the bad guy. My career might actually be done. Then Kristen texted. First time since I'd moved out. Saw the news. This is exactly what I was talking about. You've always been like this. Preston and I are praying for you. LOL. I stared at that message for a minute, blocked her number, and went back to helping Casey verify documents. 2 weeks later, Casey's article went live. The headline was better than I could have imagined. IPO Day. Chaos raises questions about labor practices at Silicon Valley startup. Casey had included screenshots with names partially redacted for legal cover, laid out the story of broken promises and verbal agreements that were never honored. Even found two other former contractors Owen had treated similarly. One guy had been promised equity, then fired 2 months before his supposed vesting date. Another had worked insane hours for 6 months and been paid well below market rate. It wasn't just me. This was Owen's pattern. Get desperate developers. Promise them the world. Work them until they break. Give them nothing. The article got solid traction. Several thousand shares in the first day. The comments section filled with people sharing their own nightmare stories from startup culture. My inbox flooded with messages from other developers who'd been exploited. One message stood out. Former developer who'd worked there before me explained how Owen had promised him equity, worked him for a year and a half, then let him go for culture fit issues right before a funding round. The guy attached some Slack messages showing Owen making similar promises. Same lies. Different victim. His name was Caleb, and he'd been employee number 4. Smart guy, had built their first mobile app from scratch. Owen had promised him 0.5% equity and a path to CTO if things worked out. After 18 months of grinding, Owen fired him 2 weeks before Series A closed. The official reason was misalignment on company vision. The real reason was that equity was about to be worth something, and Owen didn't want to share. Vicky apparently told people in a meeting that I was just bitter, and that some people can't handle startup culture. Someone sent a recording to Casey, who included it in a follow-up piece. Brett said, "We gave him every opportunity to succeed, but some people just aren't cut out for growth environments." The company tried to fight back with a defamation threat against me and Casey. Their lawyers sent aggressive letters. That's when I realized I needed actual legal help, instead of just operating on spite and rage. Found a lawyer named Billy Pearson through recommendations online. His office called back the same day, said he'd read the article and could meet soon. I spent time organizing evidence. Billy's office was in an old building downtown. He was maybe 50. I showed up with boxes of printed evidence and a USB drive with everything digital. We spent several hours going through it all. He asked good questions, took notes, didn't react much. When I showed him Owen's messages, his expression tightened, but he stayed professional. "Here's your situation," he finally said. "Civil defamation threat is manageable. The real question is if they try to pursue criminal charges under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." I had authorized access to everything. I just quit. I know. But if they argue you intentionally caused damage by withholding information or leaving strategically, CFAA has been stretched to cover that before. He leaned back. The good news is, it's a stretch. The bad news is, they lost millions on IPO day, and they're angry. My stomach dropped. So what do? We build a defense just in case. First rule, no more talking to journalists without checking with me. We spent the rest of the time on calculations. Turned out 3 years of massive overtime with no overtime pay meant they owed me a lot in back wages. Billy said we could file counterclaims for wage theft, fraudulent inducement, unjust enrichment. They messed with the wrong developer, Billy said as I was leaving. I hoped he was right. The lawsuit arrived 2 weeks later via FedEx. 40 pages of legal language that basically said I'd abandoned my responsibilities and damaged their company on purpose. They wanted $15 million in damages, $15 million from a guy living in a studio apartment that smelled like regret and old carpet. Billy told me not to panic, but I was definitely panicking. Then I noticed LinkedIn views from what looked like federal offices. They were at least looking into it. "We need to be proactive," Billy said over the phone. "I'm gathering everything to show you acted in good faith. Employment contract, resignation email, everything." Zach brought over food and stayed most nights that week because he could tell I was losing it. Every knock on the door made me jump. Every unknown number could be them. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just sat there imagining my parents' faces when their son got sued for millions. Meanwhile, Owen was doing a victim tour on financial shows, always wearing expensive suits, always looking wounded, always talking about betrayal and trust, and how he'd given me every opportunity. Never mentioned the messages or the 3 years of broken promises. Vicky went on LinkedIn and posted about toxic employees who damage company culture. Got thousands of likes from other founders and executives. She ended it with, "Sometimes you have to protect your business from people who feel entitled to success they didn't earn." The company tried to get a restraining order, trying to stop me from making any more public statements. The hearing was scheduled. Billy started preparing First Amendment arguments, while I tried not to think about how my life had become a full-time legal nightmare. Then things got weird. Someone posted my address on a tech forum. Pizza deliveries I didn't order started showing up. Random people called my landlord with complaints. Someone sent flowers to my door with a card that said, "Sorry for your loss," which was just creepy. My landlord called asking what was going on. A nice older lady who'd always been fair with me, and now she was getting calls from strangers claiming I was running some kind of illegal operation. I had to explain the whole situation while she listened with increasing concern. She believed me but said if the harassment continued, she might need to reconsider the lease. Another potential consequence I hadn't considered. Billy documented everything for potential harassment claims, but told me I should probably stay somewhere else for a bit. I crashed at Zach's place. He didn't complain, just gave me the spare room and made extra food and reminded me he had my back. The restraining order hearing was tense. I wore my only suit. Sat there trying not to fidget while their lawyers argued I was dangerous and needed to be silenced for the company's protection. Billy stood up and calmly explained I'd only shared truthful information with journalists, which is protected by the First Amendment. Unless they could prove the information was false, they couldn't stop me from talking about my own work experience. The judge narrowed it way down. I couldn't access their systems anymore, which I had zero plans to do anyway. But I could still talk to journalists, regulators, anyone I wanted about what happened. Small victory, but I'd take it. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions and document requests. Billy kept saying we had a good case for the counterclaim, that their own Slack messages proved fraudulent inducement, that the unpaid overtime was documented fact. They'll probably want to settle, he said during one meeting. This is ugly for them. Those messages make them look terrible. How long? Could be months. Could be over a year. Depends how stubborn they want to be. Over a year of my life in legal limbo. Perfect. Month 4 of my life being a legal disaster. My bank account was getting scary low between legal fees and not being able to work because nobody would hire someone with an active multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Billy was giving me a discount, but lawyers aren't cheap. That's when Owen's lawyers sent their first settlement offer. $25,000 and a comprehensive NDA. Basically, shut up forever for pocket change. Billy actually laughed when he read it. We're countering way higher, much higher. They'll never pay that. Maybe not. But we're starting strong. He grabbed his legal pad. Plus, I'm adding your back pay calculations. They owe you around $280,000 in unpaid overtime alone based on California law. The settlement negotiations dragged on for months. Every email hostile. Every phone call a battle. They kept threatening to push harder. We kept threatening SEC complaints and Department of Labor investigations. Back and forth while my life stayed in limbo. Their lawyer was this woman named Monica, knew all the moves. Start with an insulting lowball offer to test resolve. Claim the other side's damages are inflated. Suggest both parties just want to move on. Imply that continuing to fight would cost everyone more than settling. It was a dance, and both sides knew the steps. Casey published a follow-up article about labor issues in tech. Didn't name me directly, but everyone knew. The publicity kept pressure on Owen and his company. Their stock had stabilized, but lower than IPO price. Investors were unhappy. The board had put Owen on leave, which apparently meant he got paid to stay home, while Vicky and Brett tried to save the company. Then, I got a LinkedIn message from someone named Earl, who ran engineering at a different startup. Said he'd read about my situation and wanted to talk about contract work. Needed to understand what happened first, but was open to working with me if things checked out. Billy said meeting was fine as long as I didn't sign anything. Earl and I grabbed coffee downtown. He asked technical questions about my actual work, seemed interested in my skills rather than the drama. Said he'd send over an offer after talking to his board. First good news in months. The settlement negotiations kept going. They offered $85,000. We countered at $375,000. They came back at $125,000. We dropped to $325,000. Round and round like the world's most stressful auction. Billy kept pushing on the wage theft angle. They owe you the money legally. This isn't charity. This is them paying what they should have paid 3 years ago. 6 months after everything started, we finally scheduled formal mediation. We met at a neutral law office. Their lawyers showed up with a board member who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Billy walked them through our documentation. Every email where I'd warned about technical problems. Every Slack message where they dismissed my concerns. Timesheets showing 90-hour weeks. Proof I'd worked holidays. The board guy's face went tight when he saw Owen's message about keeping me thinking I'd get equity. Their lawyer acknowledged communication issues on both sides. Floated $185,000 with mutual non-disparagement. Billy countered at $315,000 with limited speech restrictions that let me discuss general industry practices without naming them. Plus written acknowledgement, this was a settlement, not an admission of wrongdoing on my part. They took a break, came back wanting some technical consultation to help their transition. Limited handoff, Billy proposed. He documents what he can in a controlled setting. No ongoing support. More hours of negotiating. Food delivered. Coffee consumed. Numbers on whiteboards. Finally settled on $275,000 with specific speech restrictions and a one-time technical handoff session. Paperwork took forever. Both lawyers arguing over exact wording. By the time we signed, it was late and I was exhausted. But it was finally over. The technical handoff took one long day. 8 hours of me sitting at my computer with their engineers watching while I explained systems I'd built, showed them documentation, answered their questions. They took detailed notes. One engineer admitted the codebase was more complex than anyone realized. Yeah, that's why I kept asking for time to refactor things properly. By hour 8, they had what they needed. I closed my laptop, and that chapter was done. The settlement money hit about 10 days later. $275,000 minus taxes and legal fees left me with roughly $165,000. Not the $6 million from equity I'd been promised, but enough. Enough to survive. Enough to start over. Enough to prove I wasn't just some disposable contractor. I rented a better apartment in a better building. Bought real furniture. Started eating food that didn't come from gas stations. It felt weird at first waiting for the catch, but it never came. Earl followed through on the job offer. Clean contract work with clear boundaries. Every task had written specifications. Every hour got logged and paid on time. No emergency calls at 3 a.m. No promises of future wealth. Just normal professional work. Took some adjusting, but good adjusting. The first time Earl asked me to work on a weekend, I almost said yes out of habit. Then I remembered I didn't have to anymore. Told him Monday would work fine. He just said, "Sounds good," and that was it. No guilt trip. No passive-aggressive comments about team players. Owen resigned quietly a few months after the settlement. Took a position at another startup within weeks, because guys like him always land on their feet. Some people fail upward. It's a gift. The stock eventually stabilized around $38 and everyone moved on. Billy told me to keep all the documentation for years. So I rented a safe deposit box for the important stuff. 4 months into working with Earl, he offered to extend my contract with a raise. The work was boring compared to the old days of impossible problems at 2 a.m. Normal development and code reviews and regular enterprise work. But boring was good. Boring meant stable. Boring meant I could plan my weekends. Recruiters started reaching out with actual offers. I was careful about which ones I answered and turned down anything that mentioned equity or disruption or changing the world. Been there. Got the lawsuit. Learned my lesson. Then, 8 months after everything ended, I was at this coffee shop near my new place working when this happened. Someone sat down across from me, looked up, and there was Kristen. First time seeing her since we broke up. She looked different. Tired, maybe. "Hi," she said. "I wasn't sure if you'd still come here." She looked uncomfortable. I saw the stuff about the settlement. About what they did. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About how everything ended. Okay. Preston and I broke up. Turns out he was seeing other people while we were together. She tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. I should have seen that coming. I didn't reply. I've been thinking a lot about us. About how maybe I was too hard on you. You were trying to build something and I didn't get it. She looked at me with those eyes. Maybe we could try again? I took a sip of coffee and really looked at her. This woman who'd cheated and blamed me for it. Called me pathetic. Then got cheated on herself. Who'd texted me during my worst moment to tell me Preston was praying for me? Karma is a beach. I just looked at her and smiled. No, Kristen. Of course not. What do you mean no? I closed my laptop. You cheated on me and blamed me for it. Then you texted me during the worst period of my life to mock me. What makes you think I'd ever want you back in my life? It's not like that. Don't, I interrupted her. This is so pathetic. I don't even want to hear you. She was tearing up. I made mistakes, but so did you. You were never home? You're right. I did make mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. Stood up. But I don't repeat those mistakes anymore. You're being cruel. No, I'm being honest. There's a difference. I started walking away, then stopped. Oh, and Kristen, I was going to propose, had the ring and everything. Glad I found out what you really were before I made that mistake. Her face went pale. Really? Yeah, thank God I dodged that bullet. I walked out and didn't look back. Got in my car and drove away. 10 months after the IPO disaster, I was living in a decent apartment, working a stable job, and had money saved for the first time ever. Life was finally good and peaceful, and I will always protect it at all costs. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.